Charcoal has a wide range of uses and is deceptively simple to make, even in a backyard setting. And you only really need 4 things to make it. You'll need a sealable steel container with a little hole cut in it. Any kind of dried hardwood will do. We'll be using specifically oak for this batch. And finally, a place to light a fire, as well as plenty of quote-unquote garbage wood. This one will be fueled by an assortment of white and red pine. The first and arguably most important step is finding yourself a steel bucket like this one. In my experience, this is the best type of bucket to use for small batches of charcoal. I got this one at Ace for maybe $15, $20. I've seen some people use paint cans in the past to do something like this. The steel they use to make paint cans is relatively thin, especially compared to what we have here. Where after a couple batches of heating and cooling making charcoal, the paint can will be stressed so much that it'll just break and fall apart. This is a little bit more durable and it'll last us years to come. I've also seen people use 55-gallon steel drums to make charcoal, and although that is a good idea, you can do that. The problem with the steel drums is that they're too big. You're not going to make 55 gallons worth of charcoal in a backyard with neighbors a stone's throw away. So once you've acquired yourself the ideal steel container for this project, cut yourself a little hole in the lid for the smoke to escape. The next 2 steps kind of happen at the same time. You want a roaring fire for this charcoal to develop properly. So while this fire is getting set up, while also maintaining a safe watch on it, making sure it's not getting out of hand, we're going to go prepare the hardwood, or the oak in our case. That's going to go inside the bucket and be turned into charcoal. Now while the fire is catching and getting established, you have time to select the wood that's going to go inside the barrel. Now like I said earlier, any kind of hardwood will do. We're sticking with oak for this one. Making charcoal is pretty forgiving. You can use logs like this that are just circular and small and have all the bark and everything still attached. You can use split logs like this. They don't really have any bark on them. The only thing to look out for is you want to select logs that are kind of thin like this one here. You don't want anything terribly thick like this because you want to increase the surface area of the logs in the container, because when the heat goes inside, it's going to go in through all areas. And having a thinner log like this one here will make the process go by much faster. Another thing to look out for is you want logs that are dried. So like in here we have logs in a woodshed that are away from the elements, they're not getting rained on. These will be great to pick for this project. But if you have logs like these that are fresh cut and still very damp and very much alive, or if you just cut this tree down and want to make charcoal out of it the next day, you're going to have some tough luck trying to get that accomplished. The wood's going to be way too wet, it's going to smoke too much, and the charcoal won't form properly. Another thing with the surface area I was mentioning about the logs, you're going to want to cut them to maybe about this big, roughly, maybe a little smaller, a little bigger. You don't want to go sticking this whole log into the container because the outside of it's going to turn into charcoal, but the inside's still going to stay cool and it's not going to develop properly. And we don't want charred wood, we want charcoal. Once you have your wood prepared and cut into smaller pieces like this, it's time to stuff the bucket. Generally speaking, there's no real rhyme or reason when it comes to stuffing the bucket. You just want to make it as tight as possible with as little gaps as possible to maximize efficiency per batch. So once you're done, go ahead and place the lid on the bucket, making sure it's sealed tight, and head on over to your fire. For this next step, you literally just pick up the bucket and place it into the fire. But since I have this fancy fishing pole shaped contraption that we use to suspend our racks and grills to cook over the fire, I will be hooking the bucket onto this neat little doohickey. For a fun little side project, what you can do is you can weigh the bucket with the wood before it's turned into charcoal, and then weigh it afterwards and see just how much weight has been lost. When you first put it on, you'll start to see the first wisps of smoke coming out of the hole that we cut. This is foreshadowing of what's to come. Now ideally you want the bucket centered in the fire with the logs completely surrounding it for maximum efficiency and for maximum heat transfer. But as with all things in life, if you don't have what you like, You gotta learn to like what you have. If you've got your bucket set up in a similar situation as I do here, where the heat's only catching up on one side, I like to rotate it around a bit every now and then to make sure that it's evenly distributed. Let's take a second to talk about what's going on inside the bucket. As the wood gets hotter and hotter inside the bucket, it wants to combust. But, as you remember, this is an airtight bucket and there's no oxygen inside, so it can't combust. So it gets hotter and it gets hotter and it gets angrier, and it kicks off basically everything that's on the wood. All the residue water vapor, all the potassium, the nitrogen, everything's expelled off as gases until we get left with a compound that's basically pure carbon. We get left with charcoal. This process can go on for several hours, so I recommend starting this in the evening for a couple of reasons. One being this smoke here. All this smoke is going to attract the attention of your neighbors. They'll be looking over their fences trying to figure out what's causing all this smoke. Maybe they'll think your house is on fire. Maybe the homeowners association won't be too pleased. That and this process takes a couple hours to finish. I recommend waiting another couple of hours once you're done to let the charcoal cool before you can use it. You can tell how far along in the charcoal making process you are based on what's coming out of that exhaust. There's 3 main stages in the making of charcoal. The first stage, like you see here, is the white smoke coming out of the vent. Eventually you'll get flammable gases coming out of the vent, and they'll ignite by the fire below it, making it sound very similar to a jet engine. It'll look and sound something like this. With enough heat, you can see the jet get pretty big. After the jet stage, you should get a normal flame coming out. And after the normal flame stage, you'll see nothing, maybe a little bit of smoke coming out of that vent. But once you get to this stage, you know your charcoal's done. You can take it off the heat and let it cool. I'm gonna let it hang here for honestly longer than I need to. Probably closer to like 5 or 6 hours. See, once you make your charcoal, you're gonna need to store it somewhere. If you're like me, you're gonna store it in a plastic bin like I have here. If you don't let your charcoal cool down and you put it in one of these plastic bins when it's hot, it'll melt the bin itself and it might even catch fire and burn down the house or garage you're storing it in. Without revealing too much, trust me, I'm speaking from experience. With the charcoal you made today, you can make a steak. You start the Industrial Revolution, or just store it in a box to admire. If you like what you saw, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification icon to stay up to date on when I post. If you change your mind, you can always unsubscribe later. But until next time, bye.